Assalamualaikum to Madam Hasma. My name is Zawani binti Muhammad Razi and also my group mate which are Fatin Shazwani binti Muzaffar, Izzat Izzati binti Mak Said and also Nohayati binti Rasidi. We want to present about our group assignment. The title is Islamic Derivative. Introduction to Islamic Derivative. Based on Bank Negara Malaysia (BNM), derivatives are financial tools used to hedge one's exposure to volatile stock. The value of a derivative asset depends on and differs from the underlying instrument such as commodity, interest rate, index, or security. A derivative is a financial security with a valuation that is based on or extracted from the underlying asset or category of asset as a benchmark. The derivative itself is a contract between two or more parties, and the derivative derives its price from the fluctuation of the underlying asset. Derivative can be traded over the counter or known as OTC or be sold. OTC derivative comprise a higher proportion of the derivative market. OTC traded options typically have a higher probability of the counterparty risk. The risk of a counterparty is the risk that one of the parties involved in the deal could default. This party trade between two private parties and are unregulated. Conversely, exchange traded instruments are structured and more strictly supervised. Meanwhile, for Islamic derivative means financial asset that aims to create a similar economic profile to conventional derivative instrument, although a Sharia compliant framework. Under Sharia, all financial instrument and transaction must be exempt from at least the following 5 factors, which are riba, mean interest, riswah, corruption, maisir, gambling, gara, uncertainty, and jahl, ignorance. The Quran expressly refers to the difference between trade and riba in the following verse. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 275, those who eat riba do not stand except as stand one whom shaitan has the being tough through the conversion. That is because they say sell is like a riba. God has permitted trade and forbidden riba. There are 4 types of derivative in Islamic. First, arbun contract. Arbun means earns money or down payment, a non-refundable deposit paid by the buyer to the seller upon concluding of sale, with the provision that contract will be completed during the prescribed period. Next is wa'ad contract. Wa'ad means promise which connected an expression of willingness of an person or a group of persons on a particular subject matter. The third is salam contract. Salam contract means which an advance payment is made for good to be delivered at the future date. Profit and loss sharing suggests an equitable sharing of risk and profit between the parts involved in a financial transaction. And the last one is istisna contract, refer to a contract for the acquisition of goods by specification, where the price is paid at the time of contract or paid gradually in accordance with the progress or end completion of a job. Next is type of derivative in conventional. First is future. A future contract is an agreement between two parties to buy or sell an asset at a certain time in the future for a specific price. Furthermore is forward. Forward a contract between two parties for one party to buy something from the other at a later date at a price agreed upon today. The last but not least, swap. Swap means a bilateral contract where the parties agree to exchange a series of cash flow at fixed periodic interval based on underlying asset. And the last one is option, means financial instrument that convey a right but not an obligation to engage in a future transaction on some underlying security or any future contract. Sharia compliant derivative instrument means all Islamic financial instruments must follow a variety of requirements in order to be considered halal permissible. At the primary stage, all financial instruments and transactions must be free of at least of the following items, which are riba, interest, gharar, uncertainty, maisir, gambling, and other undue activities. Firstly, riba, interest. Riba can be in different form and is prohibited in all its form. For example, riba can also occur when one gets a positive return without taking any risk. Next is gharar, uncertainty. Gharar appears to be no consensus on what gharar means. It has been taken to mean unnecessary risk, deception, internationally induced uncertainty. In the context of financial transaction, gharar could be thought as a looseness of the underlying contract, such as the one or both parties are certain about possible outcomes. The last one is maisir, gambling. Maisir from a financial instrument viewpoint would be one where the outcome is purely depend on chance alone is in gambling. The type of Islamic derivatives are currently in use are first Islamic FX forex known as IFF. Next is Islamic swap. Under Islamic swap has FX swap, Islamic cross counterparty swap, and Islamic profit rate swap. And the last one is Islamic option and future contract.
Next, Sharia principles and Muslim jurist opinions on Islamic derivative products will be presented by Fatin Shazwani.
Next, I will explain on Sharia principle and Muslim jurist opinion on Islamic derivative product. There are 4 Islamic derivative product which are arbun, wa'ad, salam and also istisna. I will explain more detail regarding Muslim jurist opinion for these 4 Islamic derivative products. Firstly is Sharia principles and Muslim jurist opinion on arbun. Even though there are possibility of different view on arbun Sharia compliance status and the common prohibition of its nearest conventional analog, which is options contract, contemporary jurists have come to a consensus on the admissibility of the arbun in modern Islamic finance practice. Based on Al-Hanabilah, Muhammad ibn Sirin and also Ibn Umar, they approved the sale of arbun based on the practice done by Umar al-Khattab. The situation is, Umar al-Khattab once appointed Nafi ibn al-Harith to buy a house for 4,000 dirham from Safwan ibn Umayyah in Mecca, and Safwan asked Umar for a 10% deposit and set down a condition where the deposit would be his if Umar cancelled the contract, and Umar al-Khattab agreed with the condition. However, other jurists such as Al-Hanafiyah, Al-Malikiyah and Abdullah bin Abbas view arbun sale as invalid based on hadith narrated by Amr ibn Su'aib, which stated that the Prophet forbade us from the sale of arbun as the sale contains element of qarar, maisir, 2 invalid conditions, 1 unfair stipulation, illegal taking of others' property and also unspecific khiyar. Next slide is about the opinion of Muslim jurists on wa'ad. There is a dispute on whether wa'ad can be made to perform exchange contracts such as selling, lease or marriage in the future. According to Ibn Alish, wa'ad can only bind the voluntary contract, whilst exchange contracts are exempt from wa'ad. In addition, according to Sheikh Badru Al-Mutawalli Abdul Basit, as the Sharia advisor of Kuwait Finance House, he states that any unilateral promise that does not authorize or forbid unlawful actions, is binding on the judiciary and on religion. In addition, the opinion from Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, the Mufti of Saudi Arabia, promises to sell is allowable given that the goods promised are the property of those who make the promise. Sharia principle and Muslim jurist opinion on salam. There is an evidence on the permissibility of salam from hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas. The hadith stated that the Messenger of Allah came to Medina and the society used to pay in advance the price of fruits to be delivered within 1 or 2 years. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever pays money in advance for dates to be delivered later should pay it for non-specific weight and measure of the dates. In addition, there is the permissibility of the delay of the payment from the Maliki school. However, the delay of the payment is only permitted for 3 days. Meanwhile, the Shafi'i school is of the opinion that the salam products can be delivered immediately or at a later date. However, Imam Abu Hanifah, on the other hand, did not permit salam in goods that were not measurable or weighable, particularly in the case of animal. This is because animals can change in time along with its characteristics. Last but not least is Muslim jurist opinion on istisna. There is an evidence from hadith about the permissibility of istisna. In the hadith reported by Abdullah, indeed that the Prophet ﷺ booked the making of a golden ring. However, jurists who deem istisna permissible have accepted that istisna only refers to manufactured product and is thus void for non-manufactured items such as wheat, corn, fruits and also barley. Meanwhile, there is also opinion from Majalah Al-Ahkam Al-Adliyah where they agreed on the admissibility of istisna provided that the definitions and attributes of the organized subject matter must be unanimously agreed upon. Hence, the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institution (AAOIFI) states that they allow istisna as long as the applicable principles are implemented accordingly.
Comparison between Islamic and conventional derivative products will be presented by Izan Izzati.
Next is comparison between Islamic and conventional derivative products. First comparison under Bio-Ubun. Based on Islamic derivative products, the money is not premium but an advance on the deal price. The buyer pays to the seller who deposit the right to settle or cancel the agreement. If the customer continues the agreement within the agreed period, the money will be part of the negotiated price. If the seller wishes to terminate the agreement or decide not to continue the agreement, the buyer will lose the actual money. Meanwhile, under conventional derivative products, the nature and use of alternative are impossible to do, which is gambling. And the charge are not allowed and the deposit at Bio-Ubun from part of the contract price, while in the case of a traditional call option, the deposit is the selling price of the right to that price. Next, under buy-external contract, based on the Islamic derivative product, it's the nature and quality of the item to be determined. And the manufacturer must make a promise to deliver the goods as mentioned. So, the goods will be shipped by the manufacturer upon completion. The contract cannot be withdrawn upon commencement, even if the shipped product does not agree to the term of the contract. So, the payment can be made in one amount or increment at any time before or outside distribution time. And the manufacturer is responsible for obtaining input from the production process. Meanwhile, under conventional derivative products, under external contract, it is more in line with traditional futures agreement, where the premium is not charged in advance. As far as product distribution, it will be done because real estate is processed only after both parties have completed the terms of the contract. Next, based on wa'ad contract, which is two parties that make unilateral guarantees on the same issue. The wa'ad contract, while legitimate and consistent with the Sharia law, does not have incentive and conclude the pledge. In this type, wa'ad contracts have been signed in the Islamic finance world Meanwhile, under conventional derivative products, it is not permissible to connect two financial transactions among the principles of Sharia. There are two similar trades in the swap deal that take place, such as the sale of cash to the national currency.
That is structure of murabahah. As you can see, this is the flowchart of murabahah. Step 1 shows that bank purchased the commodities from broker 1 for 500,000 ringgit. Then step 2, bank sells the commodities to counterparty at cost price plus markup price, which means 500,000 ringgit plus 10,000 ringgit equal to 510,000 ringgit. So the markup price is a profit for the bank. Step 3 is counterparty pay the commodities to the bank in deferred payment, or counterparty also can pay at the end of an agreed period in one lump sum. Step 4 is counterparty sell the commodities to broker 2 at a price equal to cost price that bank has sold to counterparty, which is 500,000 ringgit. Continue with Islamic profit rate swap by Izan Izzati.
Islamic profit rate swap is an agreement to exchange profit rates between a fixed rate party and a floating rate party, or vice versa, that implemented through the execution of a series of murabahah contracts, which is sale of an asset with cost plus profit. The national principal is never exchanged as it is net off. Swap typically refers to the difference in the price over and above the national principal, in which one party pays a fixed rate and another pays a floating rate. Next is objective of Islamic profit rate swap. First, to match funding rates with return rates from investment. Second, to achieve lower cost of funding. Third, to restructure existing debt profile without raising new finance or altering the structure of the balance sheet. Fourth, to manage exposure to interest rate movement, as Islamic financial institutions still compete with conventional banks for market space.
Next, Fatisha Zawani will present on how Islamic profit rate swap working towards Sharia compliant derivative. Islamic law or Sharia principles regulate economic, social and political relationship and institution. The legal principles of Sharia are drawn from primary and secondary sources in Islam. The primary sources for Sharia principles are Al-Quran and Sunnah. Meanwhile, the secondary sources of Islamic law are a set of methods, for instance, the consensus of Sharia scholars or ijma', that allow the extraction of additional laws from the primary sources and apply in modern contexts. Moreover, there are 4 Sunni schools of jurisprudence called mazhab. These schools are more alike, but there are some differences in certain financing methods deemed permissible by Sharia scholars. I will continue on the case of profit rate swap. Profit rate swap product must not contravene with Islamic law, where it cannot consist these 3 prohibited elements, which are riba, gharar and also maisir. Hence, the issue when constructing the Sharia compliant derivative is to organize the transaction in such a manner where the parties gain benefit from the constructive risk sharing that derivative can offer, but without compromising the underlying prohibition.
Continue with structure of Islamic profit rate swap by Nur Hayati.
Let's continue with how Islamic profit rate swap works. There are 2 stages in how IPRS works. Stage 1 is fixed profit rate. Now let me explain. Step 1 is CIMB sell assets to Islamic swap counterparty at national principal of 500,000 ringgit. Step 2, Islamic swap counterparty sells the assets to CIMB at national principal of 500,000 ringgit plus markup based on fixed profit rates. Then, national principal amount of 500,000 ringgit owed by both CIMB and Islamic swap counterparty to each other is set off. It means that both of the party enter the agreement. Step 3 is CIMB paid to Islamic Swap Counterparty the agreed interval payment date of say 6 months according to agreed profit rate. Now, let's see how Islamic profit rate swap works in stage 2, which is floating profit rates. Step 1, CIMB sell assets to Islamic swap counterparty at national principal of RM500,000 plus floating profit rates. Step 2, Islamic swap counterparty sells the asset to CIMB at national principal of RM500,000. Then, national principal amounts of RM500,000 owed by both CIMB and Islamic swap counterparty to each other is set off. It means that both of the party has entered the agreement. Step 3, Islamic swap counterparty paid to CIMB the agreed interval payment date of say 6 months. According to agreed fixed profit rates, the floating rate is repeat every 6 months until maturity.
Next, continue with conclusions by Zawani.
With the growth of the Islamic finance industry over the last few decades, in the time of the global financial crisis, many new avenues have been opened up under the Sharia-compliant financial instrument. Also, in conventional finance, a continuous instrument derivative have crept into the discourse on permissibility in Islamic financial circles. The derivative instruments are, by their design, a mere method for risk control. Islamic financial institutions must comply with the Sharia, but they are not isolated from the same trade as their conventional counterparts. Next is, they will need to manage their risk not only for their own treasury management, but also to build products that allow their client to manage their risk, for example, to minimize the exposure of an entity or a company to currency risk. The place of derivative in Islamic financial market is well founded in the sense of risk control and little more than that. However, the factor implementation of certain derivative contract is objectionable due to the glaring contradiction of Sharia between traditional derivative, the ability of trading to breach the ideals of distributive fairness and fair risk sharing is also a big eye catcher for the ban of the sale use of conventional derivative contract. Next is Sharia guidance. Remaining in the Sharia guidance, there are tools that allow Islamic financial institutions to control their exposure to risk in a manner similar to conventional finance. Does not mean that the same method they are used. Islamic financial contract, by their very existence, has some derivative characteristics and can be further formed into instrument and instrument based on the fundamental concept of Islamic contract law. This initiative is not aimed at developing exotic instruments for profit making, but at developing Islamic finance and putting it on an equal footing to compete against the century-old conventional financial world.
So, that's all from us. Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Have a nice day.